Welcome back to another Service Management Leadership Podcast. We have Steve Hayman back on the show. Steve was our third guest ever, so you can go back and pull the archives. Steve, it's great to have you back a year and a half later.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me back on.
Oh, yeah. It's open invitation for you. You are the only guest that we've had that's in the problem management space, so I enjoy seeing that perspective. So it's been a year and a half. It was summer sometime of 2020. A lot's changed in the last 18 months. And being in the problem management world, has the rest of the changes, has that changed kind of how you all do work, or has it changed anything for you all?
A lot of us, we were, primarily office workers, but, we obviously went to that remote working model and it worked out great. I mean, it's been great. And, even with everything that's going on today, you never know kind of what to expect. We've kind of been in and out of the office here lately. So it's just one of those, it's whatever we can adapt to. But the good thing is everybody knows that remote does work, and it's probably more of a hybrid model that we're going to see in the future. But I'm sure we don't know the answer still on a lot of things, but at the same time, we know we can do it. So
yeah, and I was thinking it through the lens of it probably doesn't change how you do root cause,
no,
because you're dealing with global teams anyway, and they don't care what your background is, whether it's a office or home, right?
that's correct. Most of us in the technology space are global companies these days anyway. So it works. It's a really good model that works for most companies these days.
Oh yeah. So I reflect back on the year 2021, and maybe I'm just a nerd and I accept that. I own that. But I think about the outages to Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, all those big outages in the tech space, these companies that were thought to be, oh, they'll never have an outage. They have all this redundancy. Did that change how you all did some of your root cause and your problem analysis? I mean, or is that common thought for you all anyway?
I don't know that it changed anything, but what it does, it gets us to, no one wants to be, on CNN, and you can't say something about a computer glitch. Nobody wants their name attached to that. So, when you see a high profile like Amazon or Facebook attached to something, the first question you ask is, could it happen to us? And so that's always a good question, especially in problem management, to ask is, is there something that could happen similar in our environment, and how would we handle it, and what would we do? It's hard to tell sometimes what publicly is stated and what, exactly happened. But one thing that was specific to me with the Facebook outage was, one, it happened with their internal network, and two, they were completely remote. And when they lost their network access, they lost their ability to fix it. And then they were scrambling to get people on site, it sounds like. And then they had to work through that, how to get them access. So, those are certainly things that you would want to think about if you were in a similar position. Luckily, we're not quite in that space where we do have people in the offices, and, we don't want that vulnerability of not being able to get into an office if we needed to. So, but yeah, those are things you think about, when you watch that from afar and think, well, could that happen here? So,
and I even think about the change related issues from Microsoft. I follow their Twitter account. Like I said, I own the nerd factor, right? And it was like we put in a configuration change and experiencing issues and things like that. And I think, change, they have all the redundancy in the world, right? I mean, yeah.
And that's a common theme probably in the, just really across the board globally today, where we have fewer issues, but when we do have issues, the complexity is much, much different than it was a few years ago. So part of that I like, because it makes my job, more fun to just be able to, try to, replicate that and find out, how something happened, and again, try to prevent it from happening again. But the complexity these days definitely makes a problem manager's job, more interesting today than it did a few years ago.
Oh yeah, there's something to really dive into. And I think of even proactive problem management, which is everybody does reactive, right? Everybody says, hey, there's an incident, let's go look at it. But proactive, you're looking for patterns and the way these IT does business. We talked about Amazon. I have a client who they have a lot of their stuff in one Amazon data center, but so are the SaaS applications that support them are in that same data center.
Right, right.
And I just think the way IT does business probably adds complexity, your word there, to how you do, root cause and all that other stuff.
It does because, we had an issue recently where, we came down to, and it's more and more, maybe even when we talked a year and a half ago, very rarely do you have a single root cause. And I know a lot of our tools out there like Remedy and ServiceNow, they usually concentrate on a single root cause, but really there's multiple causes sometimes of why we have an issue. And when you do your root cause follow-up and your write-ups and everything, you want to be explicit on what were the different causes, because sometimes it starts with something just like we were talking about, a configuration change. We know that was the beginning, but what happened after that? And can you continue to pull back and find out everything that happened? Because oftentimes it wasn't just that configuration, there was something else there that may have been missing.
Like from the ones I see that nobody ever talks about are when we push a defect live and nobody, it's not a showstopper, so it's all right, we don't need to document it. And then, and this was one of the Microsoft ones, a few months later, here you push a change live and you have a uh-oh moment.
Right. And sometimes you find out that the change actually didn't take place recently. It was something that happened maybe months ago, and it didn't, in that perfect storm of that situation didn't come in place to where it, came into effect. So that's where that complexity really comes into play of, how come we didn't know? Because, everybody tests everything. That's always the first question you ask. Well, how come we didn't find it in testing? And sometimes you're like, well, we did test it, but that, there's only so many thousands scenarios sometimes you can test.
Oh yeah. And I've been places, I don't want to tell secrets, but where their dev and their prod were their test environment and how their production were not on the same version. So it could pass test and still fail in production. I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen that or not. I don't want to project that onto you, but I've seen all sorts of things.
No, definitely, and it's one of those things, going back to the Facebook issue, anything could happen at any point in time. And that's why, proactive problem management is so important, because you want to make sure that you're not waiting until that next outage happens, that there's things that you can look for, trends that you find in your environment and common themes that you make, and just make sure that that's not the next big outage that's looming out there. Because proactive, while it may take a little bit bigger investment, because we often are in that firefighting mode of the current incidents, it's so much more worth the gain of going after that proactive problem searching, and looking for those things that could be common themes tomorrow.
Especially because I go and like I said, I own the nerd status, but I go and research how the cost of outages, right? And
Oh yeah,
because you don't want one of those. And even like in a medium-sized company, not a size like your employer or Microsoft or Facebook,
yeah.
those are like 10 to 15 grand a minute. But the big companies, you could add a couple zeros.
Yeah, you look at the cost of how many subject matter experts are on some of your triage calls, and that's before you even get to the problem piece. It is costly, and that there's a cost to having that many people wrapped up in however long it is. So that's something you always want to look at is, how can we reduce that?
Oh yeah. And I was just thinking like the Facebook one costs them however much in ads, how much in reputation, how much in internal costs, like you mentioned, or whatever it is. It's just one of those things. Susie didn't get her pictures uploaded because it was out or whatever. But you mentioned complexity, and if I can, I want to dive into that, because I really think that this world's becoming more and more complex. We have more external partners, suppliers, vendors. We have more outsourced infrastructure, whether it's SaaS or platform or infrastructure. We have so much complexity. Plus, everything's the banking industry is really a technology industry, and it's complex.
Yeah, complexity just, you've got to be able to just understand, that the technology is rapidly changing, and that it's not the type of technology we had in years past. And I think you mentioned at the very beginning of the call, the redundancy and stuff. Everything's geared towards, a never down type of situation where, you're geared towards not having an outage because you've built all these different levels of redundancy in. But we often don't practice enough of testing those scenarios of when that redundancy fails, how are we going to react? How are we going to be able to bring it back quickly, understand what exactly is going on? And when you're in these triage situations and you've got literally 50 and 100 people on a call, that complexity can slow things down, because your restoration times tend to be longer, because it is something that you've never seen before, because we haven't had these scenarios before.
And every day goes by, it becomes more and more complex, right? I mean,
Right.
we're going the wrong way in terms of simplification.
We are, but I'm hoping as the technology gets better, that the problem management aspects of that technology gets better too, like better logging, better monitoring, better ability to detect what that issue is when it happens or as it's happening than maybe it has been in the past, because that's something we ask on almost every call is, could we have detected it sooner? So is there some monitoring that could be in place? Or we put so much monitoring in place that sometimes it's like, oh well, we've got that in the filter and we didn't see that.
It's all working out the bumps. You mentioned about the redundancy. One of my pain points over my career has been arguing, and that's a strong word, debating with the incident people. When you lose one leg of a redundant, I'm like, put an incident in. And so that you're down to one leg of your redundancy. And there are still organizations that don't do that. And then, it becomes less of a priority, so to speak. You all may not be in that, but I'm sure there's a lot of situations where you just wish you knew more about the knowledge, about stuff before you started investigating.
Oh, absolutely. And as you're upgrading systems or new technology, it's a good idea for the people that are in that triage type of role, that they understand what has changed too, because while they may know their area really well, some of the new emerging technology, sometimes it's taken that time to understand it and how it's different than how it was in the past is a big deal.
You mentioned emerging technology. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in on how it's going to impact service management. Like chatbots, machine learning, artificial intelligence. We can go on and on, right? Even CI/CD.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's on and on and on. And I just think about how that's going to impact problem management. Will it make it easier? Like I put a post out that I think AI will help problem management in a few ways, like proactive, but it's also going to add to the complexity. And so what's your perspective on that?
I've been around technology for so long. Emerging technology has always been the question that's out there. And, the one thing about technology we do so well is we adapt to quick and rapid changing technology and have for so long. It just comes to the point where, you're just kind of surprised sometimes about, what new technology does come into play and and how it affects you differently. And I think it's good to look back and, look at maybe an outage you had, 6 months ago, and take a look at it and see if now we have new technology, how would that situation play out today? So we try to mimic some of those things in our environment where, we look at, okay, we eliminated that risk last year, but did we make it better? And are we forging towards better solutions going forward? So
I hear you. And as we start to wind down, I don't get into enough deep problem management conversations. So you're it. So we talked the last time we talked a year and a half ago about some problem management, root cause analysis techniques, methods. Has your perspective changed, or is there anything that you've grown and you're like, hey, I think everybody needs to consider X, Y, and Z? Because I think I haven't listened to it in a year and a half, but you were talking about value streams and mapping those and trying to understand, if my memory serves.
yeah, I think again, just this complexity conversation that we've had today, you know, everything starts with 5 whys for almost everybody out there. And it's still the right way. And I always say 5 whys is really not enough. It's how many whys until you get to that answer that you're looking for. But with complex issues, root cause mapping is still a technique that I find is extremely valuable. It does take a bit more time because you basically have to draw out all the different issues, and it's a nice visual way to represent if you're trying to get to a complex issue to find out, well, what triggered what. So that is still a root cause technique that I find extremely useful when we're in those type of situations. But there is no one, methodologies that's better than another. I mean, a lot of our organization went through Tefertiller last year, and I'd been through that several years ago. And it was a good refresher for me personally, because it had been a few years since I had been through it. But what I liked about it, we went through it as an organization, not just problem teams, but incident teams together with the problem teams. And we could look at that in a different way to where we're logging, just a basic way of how we're framing up the problem from incident over to problem, that I thought was very unique and something that, there's always areas for improvement. And I think collaboration with other teams is always super important, because it's not, I don't want to look at it as a problem team that, we come in and investigate. We're definitely some that comes in there to collaborate as a team, because the bottom line is we want to get better, and we don't want to have recurring issues, and we don't want to make CNN tomorrow. Nobody does.
And the most interesting part, like I've been through the Tefertiller, and what's interesting to me on all of those is their frameworks, and they look different in different organizations. And you could walk into a new organization that went through the same training, and you expect it to be exact, and it's a loose representation of where you were before.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I've been in a few different companies over the last few years, and whether it's ITIL or it's framework for the different problem techniques, you're right. It can be very unique to your organization, and so you don't want to just put this big framework where it's one size fits all. You need to make sure it fits for your organization and is something that works for you guys. So,
oh yeah, I'm with you, because you mentioned ITIL. You can mention anything, right? Incident management looks different depending on the organization and how they escalate, or I mean,
Six Sigma, it can be anything. It really can.
It's just so much that's unique, and I think that's where I have heartburn. You touched on something for me again on soapbox, Steve, but I have heartburn with most organizations. You could take 2 large banks that look exact in every other way, but they're not going to be exact. You're not going to be able to do things the same. It may be risk tolerance of leadership or support or whatever, right? And there's just so much uniqueness that you have to look at it in that specific lens with that organization and make the best of it. I've seen too many times where they, to use a Southern term, since you and I are both from the South, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh no, we're just going to do X because it worked over at another organization.
Yeah. I used to tell people this all the time. I don't know if I said anything when we talked a year and a half ago, but one thing that I tell people all the time is when people says idle says do this, run, because it is a framework and you do have to customize it for, what you're dealing with in your organization. So.
Oh yeah. What's your puppy's name? Because your puppy wants to get some airtime.
Yeah, that's Bella. Family came home at the end of this podcast here, so thought I had a quiet time, but.
Oh, it's all right. She wanted some airtime. So as we close up, Steve, is there anything, parting words or anything you want to convey to the rest of us that aren't as into problem management that would be great for us to know?
Just continue to seek out help. I mean, this podcast is a great way. I mean, I'm a contact that you can utilize and reach out to me. And, I think it's important to know that problem management isn't easy, that our organizations are getting more and more complex. And, it's one of those things. Sometimes it's just sharing and, frustrations, or sharing, things that we're going through that kind of helps, that knows that, incidents aren't going away, which is interesting because we are getting better and better. All kinds of companies are getting better, but outages never go away. So it just means that that complexity word that we've used all here today, it just means our jobs are getting tougher. But at the same time, I still find it very fun, to solve those puzzles. And one of the most satisfying issue we worked on last year was probably the most complex issue I've ever seen. And to see the teams come together and recreate it in a lab and prove it out was extremely gratifying and satisfying. And now we're just looking to be more proactive in those types of things in the future. So.
Oh yeah, and you're never finished. I don't mean that to bust anybody's bubble, but you're never finished.
It's just, we talk about it from a continual service improvement aspect, is we want to get better. And just because we may have had a really good year last year, or maybe we had a few bumps in the road, our bottom line is we want to get better and we want to improve, and we want to make sure that we don't have, some of those bigger issues in the future. So.
Oh yeah, it's all about getting better. And I would say that professionally and personally,
Oh, yeah, sure.
How do we get better? Well, Steve, it's great having you on, and we'll reach out to have you on again later this year. But thank you for taking the time, you and Bella, to join us. And it's all good. We do appreciate you sharing your knowledge.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate being on again.
Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.